We do a lot of different research projects at the Environmental Working Group on a wide range of topics. But tonight, I want to talk to you about one specific project involving 10 Americans. 10 Americans who have really been instrumental in inspiring what we consider to be one of the most important environmental campaigns in history. One day, we collected a sample of blood from each of these 10 Americans, and we sent it to a laboratory to analyze it for 413 different toxic chemical pollutants, pesticides and industrial chemicals alike. Of course, scientists have been studying pollution in air, in water, and land for decades. But it's only recently that they turned to the study of pollution in people, and that's what this project was designed also to do. There are hundreds and hundreds of toxic chemicals in the air in the United States, hundreds of millions of pounds emitted each year. But we know for a fact that none of these 10 Americans were exposed to these chemicals by virtue of the air that they breathed, even though we found some of these very chemicals in these 10 people. Could also have been the water that they drank, and believe it or not, some drinking water does start off looking like this before it's treated. But we know for a fact it wasn't the tap water. Of course, it could have been food that was the route of exposure, but we know for a fact that none of these 10 Americans were exposed to the chemicals we found in them as a result of food that they bought at the grocery store, bought at a restaurant, and consumed. That was not the source. What about personal care products? Our online survey has shown that women use an average of about 12 personal care products a day, and that exposes them to more than 160 chemical ingredients, some of them rather toxic, day after day after day. Men, the exposure is about half that because they only use about half of the personal care products that women use. But some good news, this is not a gloom and doom presentation altogether. Almost all of the men were found to use both deodorant and toothpaste. So there's kind of a silver lining there. These 10 Americans weren't farm workers, they weren't factory workers. And when the results came back from the laboratory, we had found 287 chemicals in just those 10 people, an average of 200 chemicals in each one. When you look at the chemicals by category, it's kind of astonishing. 28 different waste byproducts, dioxins, furans, things that come out of incinerators, smokestacks. 47 different consumer product ingredients, the flame retardants in these lights and this projector, Teflon chemicals, Scotchgard chemicals, pesticides. But for my money, most disturbing of all, we found 212 industrial chemicals and pesticide breakdown products that had been banned 30 years before we took those blood samples and sent them to the lab in 2004. Who were these 10 Americans? How were they exposed? Well, the truth of the matter is we don't really know very much about these 10 people. About the only thing we know is that as the exposures took place, all of them looked something like this. This was the first time anyone had ever bothered since the beginning of the chemical revolution to examine umbilical cord blood to see how many toxic chemicals got through to the developing child. Here's another view. This baby is receiving about 300 quarts of blood circulating to him from the mother every day. The nutrients that are allowing the baby to grow, the oxygen that's allowing the baby to breathe, This baby, like all babies at that age, does not have a blood-brain barrier. That means that the tissues of the brain, the cells of the brain, are not protected as they will be in later life, just a few months from now, really, to protect him from the chemicals that would pass into those tissues and those cells. So this baby arguably has been at his most vulnerable for 9 months at this stage. And the other thing to know about this baby, this is my baby. This is Callahan Cook, my son, who was born a year ago. Pediatricians and scientists hoped that babies were protected from toxic chemicals because the chemicals were filtered out by the placenta. Our study showed, disturbingly, that that's not the case. Industrial pollution begins in the womb. Obviously, this is a heavy message. We're concerned about toxic chemicals to which babies in the womb are exposed. But let me also tell you, just because a chemical is found in someone does not mean that there's going to be environmental damage, biological damage. It doesn't mean that at all. But what it does mean is that there is reason to be concerned. What it does mean is that we ought to do all we can to minimize those exposures. It stands to reason. And the reason we want to avoid them is the nature of the chemicals themselves. 134 of these chemicals had been shown to cause cancer in laboratory studies or in people. 151 associated with causing birth defects. 154 caused hormone disruption. Infertility, 186 different chemicals. Immune system toxicants, 130. Neurotoxins like lead, PCBs, mercury, that we know can have profound effects on the developing child, profound effects on their intelligence, profound effects on their motor coordination. If you're doing a little math here, you're already seeing that we have more health effects than we have chemicals. Why is that? The answer is simple. Many of these chemicals have multiple toxic effects. A recent review concluded that when you look at all of these chemicals in combination, which we never do when we review their toxicity, we look at them one at a time, you have to come to a disturbing conclusion. The combined evidence suggests that neurodevelopmental disorders caused by industrial chemicals has created a silent pandemic in modern society. So what does the chemical industry say? That there's no reason to worry. Why? Because the chemicals are safe, because the doses are so low. Parts per billion. So the question becomes, can a part per billion really cause harm? After all, a part per billion, as the industry likes to say, is equal to one pancake in a stack of pancakes 4,000 miles high. This is an actual picture that the industry took of that stack of pancakes after they stacked them 4,000 miles. They have more money than we do, but we have this cool slideshow. One pancake in a stack 4,000 miles high. What could possibly have any impact at such a low concentration?